English Literature Studies. Welcome to English Literature Studies. In this video, we are going to study what is poetry. The word poetry is derived from a Greek word poiesis, which means making. Or it is also said that it has been derived from a Greek word poets, which means doer or creator. Basically, the meaning of the word poetry is doing, making, creating. Now, what is poetry? Poetry is an art which gives aesthetic pleasure and a hidden message either directly or indirectly. Poetry is not a science, it is an art which gives aesthetic pleasure. Also a hidden message that may be directly or indirectly. Let's explore more about poetry with some other definitions. It is the output of thoughts, pain, emotions, imagination, passions, and good or bad experiences in the life of the poet. It is the output of thoughts, pain, emotions, imagination, passions, and good or bad experiences in the life of the poet. When a poet writes a piece of writing, which is poetry, he reflects his thoughts, pain, emotions, his imagination, passion, bad or good experiences in form of writing a poetry. Poetry is a metrical composition in both blank verse and rhyming scheme. Every poetry has a meter, a rhyming scheme. There are different rhyming schemes for poetry. It is always full of witty ideas, minute observations, and the sensibility of a poet. It reflects the ideas and every observation of the poet, although it reflects sensibility as well. It is the oldest form of literature. If we talk about the origin of literature, the beginning of literature, then this is the oldest form of literature. People used to write their thoughts in form of verses in early days. All branches of knowledge such as science, history, politics, mathematics, dramas were in poetic forms. In ancient times, people used to save their ideas, take down their ideas in form of verses, little short sentences which had no strict grammar. So the beginning of poetry is as old as literature is. It is the result of experiences or imaginations. It contains profound views and critical analysis. It has experiences and imaginations. It contains profound views. When a poet describes his analysis on any topic, any situation, he criticizes that topic, that situation critically. The source of expressing feelings, emotions, ideas, thoughts, and imagination is called poetry. It is the source of expression to express feelings, emotions, ideas. Poetry is a good medium for a poet. Now let's see some definitions by writers. Johnson says poetry is a metrical composition, the art of uniting pleasure with truth by calling imagination to help reason. Poetry has meters. It has metrical composition, rhyming scheme, a rhyming scheme. It unites pleasure and truth and calls imagination, uses imagination to connect the both, the pleasure and the truth. On the other hand, Matthew Arnold says poetry is the criticism of life. When a writer writes a piece of poetry, a poem, he criticizes life, how life is, how people behave in different situations. He describes the different situations of life. So Matthew Arnold describes poetry is a criticism of life. Hazlitt says poetry is a language of imagination and passion. When a poet writes a poetry, a poem, he goes in deep, profound imagination and the passion he follows. Wordsworth say, all good poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings by a man. He also says that Carolyn says poetry is the musical thought. There are many definitions of poetry given by different writers, different poets. But the main idea about poetry is it is thought. It is, if we conclude all these definitions, we can say that poetry is an imagination, is criticism of life. Poetry is a thought, musical thought. Poetry is imagination, passion. It is output of experiences of a poet, be it pain, emotion, imagination, passion, good or bad experiences, everything. When a poet writes a poetry, he includes all the things that he has experienced in his life in form of verses. Now, there are different forms of poetry and kinds of poetry. The forms of poetry include sonnet, elegy, ode, lyric, and satire. We will deeply discuss these forms of poetry in separate videos. Thank you for watching.